Hey everybody, welcome to Truth Be Told. Thank you very much for listening in today. I am always grateful when people join us and listen. And I think interviews particularly gather a lot of people to this podcast, so hopefully you enjoy this one today. It's a little bit of a departure from what we typically do. If you've joined us in the past, you'll know we've had different theologians or apologists on talking about the Bible and the ins and outs of the Word of God, which is always fascinating. But something that I'm personally passionate about is sharing our faith with others. And one way that that's been happening on like a large scale right now is through social media. I came across this guy that I'm so excited to be talking with because his approach and his style is just something that's very down to earth and I think really kind of bent on discipleship, which I have greatly appreciated. So I hope you'll check out his content, but I'm very excited to introduce you to John Mark Dyer. And I think he's going to just make a really great podcast episode today. We're going to have a really good conversation about Christianity and sharing our faith and what it's like to be a Christian in the landscape of social media. So John Mark, thanks for joining us today. I really do appreciate you being here.
Absolutely. I'm excited to talk. I'm looking forward to it.
So how long have you been doing this? You primarily I've noticed are on like Instagram. That's at least where I follow you. But how
Yep.
long has this journey been for you on social media itself?
Well, I've only started posting on Instagram and trying to really be dedicated in like the last 9 months.
Okay.
But I've been involved in Instagram for a number of years. But it just kind of dawned on me that I wasn't really playing the game according to the rules if you really wanted to have influence.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I think when when that song WAP came out a couple years ago, I made some post, like a carousel post, and I just shared my thoughts. I was like, man, this is so wild where culture is going. And that was the kind of the first time I think anything I posted on social media really got a lot of traction. A ton of people were sharing it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, okay, this is cool that you can uh guide people's thoughts and and share your opinions on social media. But a few years went by and I thought, okay, if I'm actually serious about how great the need is for good information, and I guess I was looking at everybody else on TikTok, from gurus and people telling you to manifest your destiny. And I thought, well, if they're being so bold about it, like, of course, like, why don't I get on there and tell them actually what I think could change their life? And so I had a few friends that were kind of doing it, and they were like, it's not as hard as you think, John Mark. Just stay dedicated and you're gonna figure it out. And it probably took 3 months to figure out like what felt like the right format for
Mm-hmm.
my type of content, and then it kind of took off from there.
And I think that, I mean, I know it almost seemed like you said it sheepishly. I've only been doing this for about 9 months, but I think that's why I gravitate towards you so much because you are showing me kind of a grassroots movement that you're starting. And then I can look down the line at some of the other people that have been doing this for years, and I think, okay, these people are polished, and maybe that like kind of weirds me out just a little bit, but they all started somewhere and I think they all have, I mean, a good portion of them have really good hearts. And it's just that they look so professional. And yours looks professional, but I can still tell that you are, it's like your personality hasn't like become necessarily your page, or like you are so transparent in who you are that it just still shines through so much that it hasn't become like performative necessarily, if that makes sense. And
Yeah.
I just, that transparency from you is something I really, really appreciate.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate the encouragement. I think I probably have to credit most of my thoughts in worldview that I share to YWAM and all the other smart guys that I listen to. Because
Yeah, yeah.
I definitely don't, I like philosophy and theology and all that kind of stuff, but I think my real gift is taking some of those thoughts and making them more understandable for like an
Yeah.
everyday person. And so, I look at some of the really smart guys and their arguments and stuff like that, and I'm like, man, I wish I was that smart, but what I can do is be interested and try to, boil it down to its essentials and get
Yeah.
other people that aren't usually interested in that kind of stuff, thinking a little bit more deeply.
Yeah, and this is actually where I think that you personally might help me because I was just talking with a friend about this the other day. I'm the kind of person that took a good hard look at his faith, took a good hard look at the Bible and God and all that he entails, and I had to kind of I don't want to say deconstruct because that has like a really bad maybe connotation to it, but I had to break it apart to see it at its finest pieces, see how everything fit together. And I
Yeah.
fell in love with, my faith that way. But sometimes when I go to somebody else that doesn't operate like that, they're not as technical, they're not as mechanical, and I just try and share things with them, they get really overwhelmed. And so being able to communicate that, it's okay if that's your process, but being able to communicate effectively, some of the lofty things, just so they're not lofty, just because truly Christianity can be practiced by everybody. You know what I mean? It's not just for the
Yeah.
intellectual, it's not for the
Absolutely.
philosophical, it's for every person. And so that's what I'm hoping, that I mean, I think there's so many people that can benefit from what you do, but personally, that's something that I get a lot out of from your content is just how do I communicate this at a very base level, and how do I look into a person's life and the pain they're experiencing and show them that the Bible, that God has the answers to these
Yeah.
things. And just remember that it's all about people. It really is all
Yeah.
about people. And I just think you do that in a great way. So maybe we should get into your approach a little bit. How did you kind of find your voice in all of this? How did you get to this style of content? Or maybe just describe what style of content you do. I don't know if I'm going to put any up
Yeah.
or whatever,
Well,
but
I mean, I, when I first started, I didn't really know what I should focus on, and people just told me you got to keep going until you find something that hits, and then you'll know like what
mm,
your audience is and your message. And so I tried a bunch of different things. If you scroll back, you'll see me trying all sorts of trends and things like that, and it didn't work. And then my favorite person on social media, he's a musician by the name of Petey, and I followed him on TikTok first, and he made these little skits of him talking to himself, but he's really clever and witty, and I just love them. And I thought, why don't I try something like that where I'm talking back and forth to myself? And as soon as I did that, I felt like that was actually what I needed to do because it really resonated with people. And then I just realized, oh, I could kind of work out these arguments and these, conversations that I've had in my own head to kind of try to explain uh, Jesus and Christianity. And I think that's essentially kind of what drove me to it is, I just saw the need for good information for people to understand the love of Jesus to, because I think so many people they see Christianity and they just see, all the issues with it. They're not looking at the beauty of Jesus.
mhm.
And so I said, you know, I would love to be able to communicate that. And I feel like that's really what my channel is about is helping people um, share their faith with others. I do a lot on evangelism, how to connect with Gen Z. Uh, and it comes from all the personal experience trying to explain Jesus to my friends, um, all the outreaches I've done with YWAM, and uh, yeah, and so yeah, I guess I've been motivated is kind of like a evangelistic tool. It was like this is something that's totally changed my life. I see it every year change so many people's lives in the YWAM schools that we run, and I just think about I often think about I go back to my high school, college friends and kind of I wish that I could have been better at articulating the value of the faith that I had back then to them. And so I think about them, I'm like, how could I explain this in a way where, they'll see the beauty of it and not some of the assumptions or prejudices that people usually have when they think about Christianity.
Right. Yeah, I think you've hit on two really important things that I'd like to go into. One is generational divides when it comes to communication. That's something I've been working on with my podcast specifically. I've been interviewing from my church group, interviewing one person from each age demographic to try
Oh,
and
interesting.
understand just like how they function. It's like a mini Barna Group research project just for me,
Yes,
and just to
that's
understand like
cool.
how are they thinking and what do they need and how do they feel they're being perceived, and all of that stuff has been illuminating for me, truly illuminating. But you seem to have like a really natural way of understanding this, especially like with Gen Z. What would you say is like one of the best discoveries you found about how to properly communicate? This is kind of like less about the social media, more about the content and the purpose of it. But what have you found, and like what can you share with people? Because I think people do really want to know, how do I talk about my faith? But then they're kind of
Yeah.
limited by the types of people they understand based on who they are.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it helps to uh, hang out with them all the time. So our schools, are full of young people, and so some of my really close friends are in that age group, and they've really opened my eyes to see their values and how they think. Um, I know for them, I guess I millennials, it felt like they were bent to kind of say, Christianity, this doesn't work. I think it's atheism. I don't think there's a God.
Hmm.
Where Gen Z, they kind of grew up saying, no, there's definitely a spiritual realm. Like I don't buy that whole there's nothing besides this. And so it
Right.
became really easy to talk about, you know, the angelic and demonic, and because they've been attacked by anxiety. They've been attacked, they've had friends that have had encounters with demons or done, people talk about DMT and seeing, the machine elves and things like that. And so they
Yeah.
just, their world is a bit enchanted. All of a sudden they're like, yeah, we do live in a spiritual realm. And, and then I think they really, I guess where millennials were really soft and careful and politically correct, Gen Z was like, nah, forget that. Like, I'm going to say it like it is. And so they really appreciate authenticity and rawness. And I think that's something church culture hasn't really figured out yet. They still want to have everything really polished and conferences and
Hmm.
professionalism. I remember first it was, I was doing graphic design and I following all like the standard rules to make things look really professional. And Gen Z came along and looked at our Instagram. They're like, no, 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 no. Let me show you how. And it was chaotic, but it was
Yeah.
bright and fun and real. And so I think they look at all like the putting yourself together, and they're like, I don't want that. I want something real and authentic. And they really want community. Like it's one of the biggest values for them. So if you can demonstrate that it's not just about ideas, it's not just about uh, thinking the right information, but like, hey, this is a family of people that they're like, they so want that. I
Hmm.
guess for me, it was kind of like, hey, here's a permission slip, go build, go start your own thing, kind of very entrepreneurial, but in like a solo sense, where I see a lot of the young people, they want to do it in team. They're like, no, I don't want to be sent off. Like, don't go and tell me to do this project alone. What could you come with me and do it alongside of me?
Hmm.
Uh, so I think those are the major trends, at least that I've noticed.
Yeah, and I think that some of the barrier to that might be, I mean, there's just huge differences between generations, and like the ones that like it a little bit more polished are possibly in danger of seeing like a Gen Z come along and want things a little less polished and think, well, you want things done improperly. And it's
Oh
like,
yeah, that's what I thought. I was like,
yeah,
you're breaking all the rules.
right, exactly. And if you think that, then you could almost begin to ascribe motive to these people when really you need to be meeting them where they are. And I don't know, this is just, it's something I've noticed in myself. And so I'm sure that other people are, I don't think I'm alone in that. And I think that there's a huge need for not just saying that we need to meet people where they are, or that Jesus meets people where they are, but to actually understand where someone is so
Yeah,
that you can meet them where they are. And I think we fall short on that. It's like we understand it ideologically, but then once we see where someone actually is, or where a whole generation actually is, we don't actually want to go there because it doesn't look right to us. And I
yeah,
think, and that division between what looks right and what is right is that plagues me a lot as well as a
yeah.
millennial.
What's another couple interesting thoughts? We had a guy named Stephen Robertson uh, come and visit, and he wrote a book called Aliens Among Us, and had done a ton of research on the next generation. And he he said a couple of things that really resonated and that had shaped how Gen Z thinks. The first was, they grew up as a subscription culture.
Oh yeah.
Uh, you don't buy movies anymore. You subscribe to Netflix.
Right.
And so there's and everyone dogs on them like, oh, they have an 8 second attention span. And he's like, no, they have an 8 second filter
Mm-hmm.
where they become so adept and quick at recognizing, no, this guy doesn't have anything to add to me. Keep swiping,
Right.
and just because of the bombardment of information that comes at them, they're really quick and discerning. It's like, no, I don't like, this isn't a voice I want in my life. Whoa,
Mm-hmm.
this is interesting. Like, I want to subscribe. And as long as you keep adding value, uh, they will stay with you. But as soon as it's kind of like, oh, I can't find anything on Netflix, cancel it,
Right.
for 6 months and kind of move on to the new thing. And so that's a pretty interesting kind of cultural force that they've grown up with, that I think has shaped how they view, uh, yeah, voices that they let into their life and influence that they let into their life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a little bit of a battle that I've had. I also do like a small online video series with my church that it's just like 5 minute videos explaining different things, quick cuts, trying to appeal to younger generation. And some of the older people that needed to kind of get on board, we needed them to get on board with it. They're like, how in the world could you preach a sermon in 5 minutes? And I was like, well, we're not preaching a sermon in 5 minutes.
Right.
That's what you need to get. But also, like, how long does it actually take? I mean, Jesus meets the woman at the well, and it's not like he spent, 5 years before she was amazed at who he was. It was a
Yeah.
few minute conversation. Or, how long did Philip ride with the Ethiopian eunuch before he asked the question, what do I need to do to be baptized? Like, it doesn't necessarily require, there's not a timestamp on how long a message has to
Yeah.
be for it to be impactful, especially with this younger generation. And flipping that script, like you said, of understanding it's not about a short attention span, which they might have, that's very possible, but it also creates an element of discernment in them and being able to recognize that as a value rather than a hindrance. I think that could change messaging for people. You're not changing the message, but you're changing the messaging. And if
Yeah.
people would do
Mhm.
that, oh man, how better could we serve that next generation? Oh,
Yeah.
it's so exciting to think about. You also touched on your college friends and thinking back on, sharing your faith with them and thinking, man, I wish I could have done that better. And I think that a lot of people have that mentality. They think, I don't want to mess it up. I better just not say anything because I might say it wrong. And I mean, you've clearly had experiences where you maybe didn't say the right thing or, didn't minister to someone as well as you could have in hindsight, but you have not let that stop you. How have you not let that stop you?
uh yeah, I mean, I think, one of the powerful lessons that I've learned, and one of the things that I felt a lot of pressure for when I was younger, was that I needed to, like, every time they needed all the information. If they didn't walk away knowing, all the elements of the gospel, I was like, oh man, I failed them.
Right.
Um, and so but then I had this paradigm shift where I realized, really, you just need to get them interested, fascinated with who Jesus is. And if you can kind of find those people that are spiritually hungry and take them the next step, that's going to start propelling them forward. And so, I started looking at a successful conversation with people about Jesus. Like, are they walking away feeling, wow, I'm fascinated by who Jesus is and I want to learn more?
Hmm.
And you know, am I walking away feeling really loved? Was there something about the culture of that conversation that's like, whoa, there must be something there? Whereas when I was younger, I was like, okay, if they didn't walk away knowing like God created the world and Adam and Eve sinned, and and trying
Right.
to shove all the information
Here's the
down their
whole
throat,
story.
and
Yeah.
then they're just like, what? And it was I had a really powerful moment. I was in the mountains of the Himalayas looking at, all these people that just they didn't know any of the Bible stories. And I was kind of like, oh, I can't just share, the five-finger gospel. None of that information has anywhere to sit in their minds.
Hmm.
And so I thought back to some teaching I'd heard, and I thought, oh, I can just tell them stories about Jesus. Like, did you know that there's a man that could heal the sick and raise the dead? Did you know that there was uh, a man that came that was God that could walk on water? Things like that just that stick in their mind, and then you follow it up, of course, with the people that are really hungry and that are curious, and you can give Bibles to anybody that's like, yeah, tell me about this. And
Hmm.
but I guess the big revelation is that as Gen Z and Gen Alpha, probably they're going to start growing up without these Bible stories. Like, traditionally Americans grew up with Bible stories
Hmm.
and would have some framework, but young generations, they're not going to have any of that. And so how we share the gospel, it's not going to be the same methods that really resonate with their heart. I think it might look a lot more like sharing your faith with someone that doesn't know the Bible stories, like Hindus and Muslims or something like that.
Right. Right. Which that comes with knowing the person because then you can know what they don't know. But if you just
Yeah.
assume, well, everybody has what I have always had, then how you interact with that person is going to be very, very different. Yeah, I never thought about, I mean, I definitely can see and I'm kind of torn because in some ways I see like Christian media is booming right now. I mean, you've got The Chosen, you've got so much social media that seems to be like, I mean, there's a lot of influencers and content producers out there that are
Yeah.
kind of steamrolling right now. It's going well. Um, but on the other hand, you also have people that if their algorithm doesn't engage them in that kind of thing, then maybe they're not getting any of it, you know? So
Yeah.
someone like me who's constantly looking for, well, what's the trend right now in Christian social media or, what are people talking about in this world? I might think everybody's in this world. And so, in one way we got a saturation, and another way we have kind of a famine. And knowing
Yeah.
where each person sits at any given time and not assuming they sit where you do, I could see being really helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
And
that's a really good point. And I think that it kind of compels me to to make more content that doesn't just get siloed in the Christian TikTok, Christian, hashtags. Um,
right.
because yeah, you do want to kind of meet people where they're at and share about Jesus in ways that anybody can kind of look at it and say, "Whoa, that's really interesting."
Yeah. Well, and I think that, the gospel, we say the gospel and it becomes like just like Christian speak, but it means good news. And it's good news about something very specific, that Jesus Christ came to the earth, that he died for our sins, that you have hope of eternal life in what he did for you. It means something specific. And yet, when Jesus is living his life, he is preaching the good news in really interesting ways. I mean, if they're hungry, he's giving them physical food, and it's good news. I can produce food for you, but I have a
Yeah.
greater food for you, And so I don't know, you have to find what is good news for a person. You know,
Yeah.
what pain are they in that you have good news about? Because Jesus is the answer to all of those things. But sometimes I think we get sidetracked into thinking it's more about, you know, just the things that It's an intellectual set of ideas, which is not wrong. The Bible does have theology to it. It does have a system to
Yeah.
it. It does have truth to it. But if Jesus isn't the answer to somebody's pain out there, then why on earth would they go after him? Why would they
Yeah.
follow him?
Yeah,
And
I
I
think
think we
I
forget
think
that.
that's one of my most unintentionally controversial topics that I bring up. I There's a great book called The 3D Gospel, and it talks about how Western Christianity's view of the gospel and sin is quite narrow. We really just view it in individual terms. We view it through the lens of we are guilty in a judicial standpoint point in front of God, the judge. And you go to other cultures and they don't wrestle with those feelings in the same way. Like I have a friend that grew up Buddhist, and she's like, I never felt guilty about sin. I didn't really have that concept. But her world was quite wrapped up in honor and shame. And then I know, my dad has had experiences talking with, I know not all Muslims are like this, but a number of them can be quite superstitious about, they call demons, their name for it is the jinn.
Mm-hmm.
And, he was in a mosque sharing with people and, sharing his story in kind of a Western way, and how Jesus came in and, uh, gave him an identity, and it was very individualistic, and he realized it was just falling totally flat. Uh, and he was wrestling with self-hatred and not feeling like he had any worth. And then it dawned on him, oh, I should talk to them in their worldview. And so then he started explaining it like, man, I had these voices, these dark voices that would come to me and say, hey, you don't have any value. You should kill yourself. You should hate yourself. And then their eyes lit up and they're like, oh, you hear from those dark spirits too. And it clicked for them. They're like, whoa. And, then he explained the gospel in terms of Jesus. He has power over this darkness. He can set you free from this darkness. And they're like, tell me more, tell me more. But when it was kind of that Western view of the gospel, it just didn't resonate in their heart.
Right.
And so that often will get a lot of comments from people that just, their only view of the gospel is, it's a sin issue in the sense that we have, we're guilty, in like a judicial way, and there's going to be a judgment, and Jesus paid that price, that's true. But
right.
I think the gospel is bigger than that. It has to do with, Jesus has power over creation and broken bodies and disease and demons, and he can restore shame, in those shame honor cultures. Like his identity that he gives people can take someone that's an outcast and done something to bring dishonor on themselves and their community, that he can restore them.
Right.
And you see it, with different stories, like the woman caught in adultery and the prodigal son. These are all like different paradigms to look at the gospel with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've actually never thought about that. I mean, as I'm speaking about it, I feel like it's what I've been saying, but I've never thought about it in the way you described it, in the sense that even within the Bible, I think of them all as generally a similar culture. They're living in the same time period. They understand the same, day-to-day living things that I have to look into as like my biblical context. But then you look at someone like Matthew, and was the gospel that Jesus preached to him community when he felt like he was hated by his, the community that he grew up in as a tax collector? Yeah. When he calmed the storm for the fishermen disciples, was that showing them that the thing that they feared the most, he had control over? And these are all parts of that same good news, that Jesus Christ is who he says he is. It's so much about sin, and you don't want to minimize that, because that is how a lot of people do look at it. I do think there's people that struggle with feeling like they're not living up to a standard that they don't even know, right? And so introducing them to that standard would be life-changing for them. But yeah, to another person that has a different fear, that doesn't even know they need to fear, some sort of moral state, that might not be the best introduction. You still have to get there. Like, I still have to get to the fact that Jesus is Lord over all creation, not just Savior of my sin, not just Redeemer of me, but the Lord over creation. But that's maybe not my starting place. Yeah. And so differentiating that, I think, I'm surprised you get kickback on that, because everybody has a different place they start from, right? And you're not denying anywhere else they might go.
I think people are just a little bit afraid that, that I'm watering down the sin issue. And of course, right. When you make 90-second reels, how nuanced can you be? And, maybe it's the only thing that they've seen from me. And, they feel like they're in some cultural war where everyone's trying to water down the gospel, and so that, that one often I'll have to address in the comments and try to help people see that
Yeah.
you know, I'm not probably as far from them as they maybe fear.
Right, right. You're not denying one, but showing the magnitude, a magnitude greater even.
Yeah.
And that actually brings me to questions I'm curious about the challenges you've had in this whole world because it seems like anybody does anything publicly, and basically all you're doing is setting yourself up for criticism and critique and anger and frustration. And sometimes, there are times where I'll get a little bit prideful, even in critique, and I'll say, well, they hated Jesus, so of course they'll hate me. And I play this little martyr role when really I might have just said something stupid.
Yeah.
But what are some of the challenges you faced in this whole world as you're kind of putting yourself out there? I mean, it could be something like, just angry comments or, anything you
Yeah.
want.
I mean, I think overwhelmingly I get encouraging comments, which is super nice. And that's really encouraging. But I feel like I get the most kickback from the really um, maybe more narrow-minded Christians that feel like I'm messing with what they feel like is orthodoxy.
Hmm.
And, that will take, they kind of come in an attack sort of a way. And so I try to, you know, build a bridge and build a relationship like, hey, we're not that far apart. Uh, and then I think atheists are probably the ones that are in the comments the most. And I mean, some of them are so smart.
Yeah.
And, I'm like, wow, some of the terms you're using, they're kind of above my head, but I, I try to engage as much as possible. And then I made one about the need to, I was trying to demonstrate how we have to be engaged in all of culture. And so I said it's important that when it comes time to vote, that Christians get in. And man, that one blew up. They were like, how can you support this side? How can you support this side? Like, how can you, both sides are evil. So how could you do anything? And
Yeah.
uh, so that one took. There was a lot of discussion, and I spent a lot of time in the comments on that one. And so, I feel like one of the challenges is, it have I studied enough to really engage meaningfully with these people? Like I want to make sure my ideas aren't shallow, and I'm not just kind of brushing them off if they do have there's some really solid critiques against Christianity and things that I don't know good answers to.
Hmm.
Um, but I try to find a way to actually connect with what's in their heart. And so that's probably the biggest challenge. And then, it is a bit, every weekend I come in and I just say, I pray and I say, God, this, my audience, you know, my platform is for your voice. What do you
Hmm.
want to say to my audience? And every once in a while it's like, I got nothing this week.
Right.
what am I gonna what am I gonna say? And because usually, if I have time, I'm listening to a lot of podcasts and reading,
Hmm.
and so ideas will bubble up from there. Um, but yeah, I would say, creativity wise, it is a bit of a grind
Yeah.
where it takes that dedication to keep going. Um, but yeah, when people disagree and you're like, oh, I want them to see, but it feels like they're combative, that can be
Yeah.
tough.
How do you manage that? And this is me just asking for me. Like there are so many times, especially when I have to batch content, like if I'm making videos, I try and release once a week at least, because I don't do as much social media. I'm horrible at social media. That's why I've got you on here. But I it's so difficult sometimes when I'm just like in my personal study, I'm in a place where I'm kind of confused myself. I don't understand this part, or I don't have a way to present this that's interesting or going to be engaging or, hit the algorithm in just the right way. And it can be a real struggle to think, I still want to be consistent because that's how the better product is going to, if I have a bad video one week, putting it out is still probably better as long as it's true. It might just not be as engaging than
Right.
not producing content, because that's kind of the nature of how all this works right now. And yet you can kind of, I feel like disingenuous sometimes where I'm just like, man, like I don't I don't know, like I don't know what to do with this. How do you work through that?
Yeah, one of the values that YWAM, I guess I've said YWAM a bunch of times. It stands for Youth with a Mission. It's a Christian organization for college students that want to go deep in their faith and share Jesus in, you know, different nations. And one of the values is do first, then teach. And so one of the boundaries that I have is I want to make sure I have real authority, and you know, this isn't just a message that I don't have, I haven't lived, that's not
Right.
authentic to me. So that's one of the
Right.
safeguards, is because I realized pretty quickly you can get into sharing all sorts of opinions, but it's like, oh, I've
Yeah.
just read the article. It's just an interesting idea and it's not
Hmm.
real to me. And I can feel it. Like every once in a while I'll be like editing a video and, you know, saying stuff and I'm like, I don't feel like I should put this out. Like I'm like on dangerous. I'm on thin ice. If anybody
Yeah.
started to push me, I'd be like, I don't know if this really is my message, something that I'm
Right.
carrying. So that's one of the safeguards. And you know, I guess one of the things that really drives me is I think about the need, and you know, I guess one of the things I struggled with in the beginning was a lot of the insecurity. And I just thought, okay, the need is too great for me to be insecure. I need to take my eyes off of myself, focus on the needs of the people. And then that really helps, because then it's not me trying to feel like, oh, I better say something that makes me look good. I better, you know, have a really smart ideas. Um, I just need to think about the people I'm trying to serve. And it's like, what do they need to hear?
Hmm.
And so it kind of puts me in that servant hearted position, and I feel like it's way easier to create from that because my ego is not in it, um, and and then you know it doesn't have to be, you know, my idea or my genius. You know, it's
Right.
like, okay, something I heard this week from, you know, John Mark Comer will be, they would love to hear that, and that would really serve them. And so I'm just trying to
Hmm.
recommunicate that. So yeah, those are some thoughts about my creative process.
Yeah, that helps. And I think that as far as I love the do first attitude. Like, am I living this?
Yeah.
And if not, then should I be, I mean, that's in James where he's like, if any of you are teaching, you're going to be judged by the things you're teaching. So be careful with
Yeah.
it, and take it seriously. I think I have a really nice benefit in that my videos are a little bit longer form, and so I can just say like, this is something I'm struggling with and I'm studying. I'm going to take you along that journey with me. You've got
Yeah.
such a short amount of time to be able to communicate some of these things, and that is, I don't know. It's funny because you've kind of like found your niche there, but in my mind, that's like what a complicated thing. And I do reels every week or shorts every week, and I think, how in the world can I whittle this into something that's worth anything? And you do it time and time again. I just think that's so incredible. It's so incredible.
Thanks. I mean, you know, it's definitely a God-given gift as well. You know, each one of us kind of has uh, you know, certain set of skills and talents that he put in us. And, you know, some people have super high IQs and they can read complicated books and figure out all the theology. And for me, you know, when it comes to a script where two people are talking back and forth, I'm like, I can kind of sit down all day and, and pound those out. So
And that's something I wanted to talk to you about too. Because you have one video that I really loved where or maybe it's a couple of videos actually that kind of lean in this direction. One specifically where you ask yourself, the other person you're talking to, you say, God, what is your will for my life? And
mm,
then you play the part of God, and you're like, well, I gave you this talent and this skill, and you're like, shouldn't I be an evangelist? And I think that's what people get in the mindset of, like, they can't really share their faith unless they have a platform, and they forget that every person has been given a platform by virtue of interacting in society.
yeah.
Um, So can you talk about that a little bit, and maybe even I don't know how specific you want to get. If not, that's okay. But I'm just interested because I feel like that's something that I could say, but I don't actually know how to explain how someone could do it, right? Like,
Yeah.
well, why don't you go to work and talk about your faith? And like, I mean, yeah, okay, but I can't just sit down and say, hey, have you heard about the book of John? Like, how
Right.
are they supposed to actively, effectively
Yeah.
do this?
Yeah. One of my favorite books on this subject is it's called The Integrated Life by Ken Eldridge or I don't know how to say his last name, but something like that. um, and he he has this beautiful way of showing, he's built these huge businesses and was very successful, but built it on the same principles that, I read some missionary biographies, and it's like, oh, they're doing the same thing just in different areas of society. He's hearing God, he's being obedient, he's building a whole structure and business with biblical principles. He's loving people very well, and so that has some really good insight for anybody that's struggling to kind of figure out how to go about it. But one of my favorite ideas, I think I read this book this year, um, but this paradigm of the original mission of God for Adam and Eve. So he created the world, and then he created a garden in the east, and that's where he put Adam and Eve.
Hmm.
But, his command was to go out into the chaos and the darkness outside of the garden and extend the garden.
Right.
And that idea, like, whoa, I always thought they were just supposed to stay in the garden always. Like that was the
Hmm.
paradise, but it
Keep it
was
nice,
always
keep it
meant
clean.
to, yeah, it was always supposed to expand. And so I just thought, oh man, where's the darkness and chaos around me? It might be, you know, a really broken relationship or person in my neighborhood. It could be a big issue like human trafficking. Um, it could be, man, my kids are at a school that's really going off the rails and being led in a way that I think is not biblical. All those things you're supposed to confront them head on
Hmm.
and align them with God's good order. And that for me shifted everything, because I guess before I thought that the Christian life was all about, you share the gospel, you get people to come to church, and that's where Christianity lived.
Right.
But then to realize, no, 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 the Bible is a book that's supposed to help people in every sphere of society figure out how to order, education, government, business, family, religion, you know, and so just as intentionally as a missionary would go and say, okay, I want to show these people the message of Jesus, then you need that next guy to come in and be like, well, let me show them how to run a school according to the ways of God. Let me show
Right.
them how to do healthcare. Uh, yeah, you shouldn't, if you have twins, it's not a curse. You shouldn't leave them in the forest to die. The twins are a blessing, and
Right.
you shape their worldview. And so all of a sudden that gave so much dignity to people that were legitimately called to business or government or education or science. And it wasn't a life of, a secondary calling, and the pastors and the missionaries were the real Christians. It
Right.
was, no, we have to be just as intentional and bold to build society according to God's wisdom in
Yeah.
any area. And for me, I feel like that all of a sudden that was a huge paradigm shift uh, that required everyone to be activated.
Yeah. I don't know if you found this to be the case, but typically in my world, whenever I have a paradigm shift, it's like something I've known forever, but now I know it differently. And
Hmm.
the way you're talking about this, I sense that some people might say, "Yeah, of course." But then I'm asking, "But are you doing that? Do you actually have that same fire or that same drive for bettering your community that you would going into the jungles of, any
Yeah.
third world country and finding a tribe that's never spoken to people?" Like there's something where we've glorified one thing and not so much the other. But the more that I learn, especially about like first century Christianity, I mean, it's very much true that, they said they'll know that you're Christians by the love you have one for another. And there was something just different about them as a community. There was something different about gathering in homes of not your family and sharing a meal, regardless of social
Yeah.
class. There was something different about gathering money to bury sick, Roman officials' kids if you needed to. And I mean, that was a really big thing. Paying for burials of people was like a huge Christian work
Hmm.
in the first century. And I'm just like,
Did
that's
you read one
not,
of Rodney Stark's books?
no, no.
Oh,
Wait, wait,
okay.
wait. Which,
He has a book called The Rise of Christianity, and it's about
okay,
how
no.
Christianity influenced the Roman Empire and why Christianity grew so fast. And it sounds
Right.
like it's a lot of these similar ideas. So I was curious.
Okay. Yeah. And well, I've read it from different books, but on face value, it doesn't look like what I thought preaching the gospel was. And maybe that's kind of the central message of where we're getting at today, just a little bit, is like whether the people that you're delivering it to aren't who you thought you'd be delivering it to, their mindsets aren't who you thought you'd be communicating with, or the method is different than you thought you'd be employing. Like it doesn't make it not effective. It doesn't make it not preaching the gospel. Because really, what power do we have? You know what I mean? We're trying to make inroads so that God can work, not so that we can do something amazing. And so God
Yeah.
can do something amazing through us. And I think we just lose sight of that sometimes when we elevate certain methods over others, whether that's
Yeah.
having a messy Instagram page versus a clean, prim and proper one, or, whether that's going and helping out at your kid's school as opposed to flying off to some country where they've never spoken English a day in their lives. I mean, it's just,
Yeah.
we got to get some of these things out of our heads.
Yeah. I just, I think, most you'd be surprised if a missionary showed up and said, "Oh, I didn't think about this, how to impact this community." I'm just kind of, going through the routine of it. You'd be like, "Oh, like what are you doing? You're not doing a good job."
Yeah,
And I think every Christian needs to look at their workplace, look at their neighborhood, and say, "How am I being strategic?"
right.
Is it I'm going to invite every family in my neighborhood over for dinner and start building relationship and see if anybody has spiritual hunger? Is it, you know, uh, do you see corruption or something wrong with the business that you're involved with that you can bring reformation to, or a social issue that you need to, make an impact in? There's so many different ways, but the crux of it is you just need to ask the Lord and say, what is my mission field and how am I going to impact it, rather than
Hmm.
just showing up and say, yeah, I, push the buttons and I sell the things and I come home and, I'm a good Christian because I go to church and I go to the Bible study.
Hmm.
And they're ignoring that whole section of their life where they're interacting with all these people and helping run a company, and they should be, that is part of their mission field that they need to be strategic about.
Right. Or even in running your family, I mean,
Yeah, that's a
it gets
big
looked
part.
down on a lot in America right now, but imagine you had like a missionary come to your door and say, "Hey, I'm just coming to bring you the good news because I've noticed your family and it seems like you guys are without the gospel." And you're like, "Wait, what? I go to church, I read my Bible." And they're like, "Right, but we noticed that you don't spend time with your children, or we noticed you know what I mean? I mean, the
Right.
huge judgment call, but I just mean like there are areas of our own lives that are not put together as well as we would like them to. And so doing that work is really important,
Yeah.
whether it's in your own personal life or just raising your kids up in the way that they should go. And I don't know, like I just think we need to not devalue any of these things that God would see as so important, and that goes down to even just things like making a video on social media where someone might say, "Oh, well, that's not, sure you had like some influence or your 15 minutes of fame, but it's like, what did that really do?" It's like, I don't know. I don't know what it would do, but maybe it would do something. Like God can bless it if he wants. I don't
Yeah.
know. Sorry, I'm getting off on a
No,
sidetrack here,
this
but
is all kind of my passion points.
yeah. Okay, well, we're getting close to the end, and I feel like I could commiserate with you and talk with you and learn from you for the next 15 hours, but I will be respectful of your time. But I do want people to check out uh, everything that you're doing because I really think that you deserve the support in just how transparent you are, how personable you are, how differently you think from other people. So where can people find your stuff? You've got some pretty easy handles to follow on social media. So
Yeah, somehow
what do you got?
I am so well branded. Everything is John Mark Dyer.
Okay, that's perfect.
But yeah, the Instagram is probably where they can find everything, the link tree in the bio. I One thing I would invite people to, I don't know when you release this, but I am uh, starting tomorrow, starting to shoot. I've built this whole curriculum of an online community that will take them through how do you hear God's voice? How do you share the gospel? How do you figure out what your mission field is? Because I think, just like we talked about for the last 10, 15 minutes, a lot of
Yeah.
people wrestle with these things. And it's not necessarily about all the right information. I mean, you need the right information, but you need those people that will just say, what's God doing in your life? What's he saying? And what are you doing about it? And so I'm going
Hmm.
to try to build some sort of online community where people are pushing each other to take risks and inspiring each other to, really bold acts of love and sharing truth with people. So hopefully, uh, that is up and running by the time people hear this. But if not, they can just, follow my Instagram.
All right, man. Well, thank you very much. I do appreciate you being on the podcast. I feel like when you agreed to come on, I thought, oh man, okay, how many directions could I possibly take this? I could just talk about the challenges of social media. I could just talk about the content that he specifically produces. I could just talk about this one video you released that I thought was really good about sharing the gospel effectively with generations or with different methodologies than you thought rather than just missionary work or whatever. And we've kind of gone into all of it. I'm hoping people find it
Right.
somewhat cohesive because it is, sorry, my brain is so scattered all the time, but I love what you do. And I think it's fantastic. And I think people will really benefit from this a lot. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks. I really enjoyed talking with you.
And thank you guys very much for listening in. Hopefully, through all of this, you've been able to follow the thread of my insane thoughts just a little bit. And if you're one of those people who's a little bit intimidated by the overwhelming amount of information on social media, hopefully, John Mark has shown you that there are good, intentional, well meaning, decent people out there that are producing content to reach people, not to try and shake things up, not to try and mess with your orthodoxy or your specific belief, but to reach new people in new ways with the exact same message that you hold dear to your heart as well. So thank you very much once again for listening. And until next time, keep on reading your Bibles. Keep on. Oh, wait, I forgot my own tagline. I'll do it again. Until next time, keep on reading your Bibles, keep on thinking critically about them, and keep on applying the truths that you learn there to your lives. Thank you.